So I want you to imagine you walk into the classroom where you guys have Bible classes for your teenagers, maybe the high school classroom. So you can imagine yourself walking into that room. Can you get in your mind for a minute an image of who those people are, those faces in your classroom? Because once you get that image in your mind, there's something I want you to appreciate about that crowd of people. I want you to appreciate that they are the most at-risk group in our church families. Have you ever thought about that? We don't tend to have a lot of people in their 60s who lose their faith. Is that the way it is where you are? I mean, if you are over the age of 60 and you're still serving God, I mean, get a t-shirt and celebrate, because you are probably gonna do that the rest of your life. The statistics are way on your side. In fact, you don't have to get that old. I mean, go down to people who are in their 30s and 40s, and if that's where you are and you are still a faithful disciple, again, the numbers are on your side. You will probably serve God the rest of your life. But if you would go back to your high school classroom, get that image in your mind of those young people sitting in there. If you just do about as well as every other church family across this country is doing, and I'm talking about our folks, half of them within the next decade at some point will stop walking with Jesus. And I will tell you, I think the half number, 50%, is really, really generous. I was talking to a young man last night, grew up in a really, really strong congregation. There were 12 kids in his high school class, really good, strong Bible classes, and he could identify one, himself, the only one out of the 12 that is still serving God. So I want you to think about those kids and recognize with me that they are our most at-risk group. Now, second thing I want to say to you about that is we don't fix that problem with Bible classes. That may be an astonishing thing to say in light of this topic that I've been assigned, but if we're going to frame this up properly, what we're here to talk about this afternoon, we need to know this. What's going wrong with kids is not a problem that we're going to be able to fix in Bible class. This is really a whole lot more about what's happening at home. And so I would direct you back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. I think this is some great refrigerator door wisdom for mom and dads, and a passage I think we need to be rehearsing with our parents all the time. Deuteronomy 6, if we could work the whole context, in the early part of the chapter, you'd find that Moses is concerned with the same thing all of us are concerned with. He's worried about young people continuing to keep this covenant that they have with God. But in addressing that problem, you'll find that where he focuses his attention is on home and with the parents. In verse 6, he said, you need to have this on your heart, and you need to teach this to your kids, and you need to talk about it all the time. When you sit in your house, when you lie down, and when you rise up, when you're out walking by the way. In verse number 9, he says, write it on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. What's he saying? You keep this in front of your kids all the time. This is about what mom and dad do at home. And so I think that we need to be reminding our parents of that and rehearsing that truth and doing what we can to provide resources. More and more churches are getting into Bible reading programs as a tool to help parents work with their kids at home. And I think we need to be doing that. I think home is where the battle is won or lost. And what we do in Bible class at its very highest level is this tiny little supplement added to the great bulk of work that mom and dad need to be doing at home. Has that framed that up the right way? I think we need to see that. Because then where I want to go next is to say this to you, this little supplement that we add in Bible class. We need to do this extraordinarily well. I just think that ought to be true of anything we do for the Lord, right? If we're doing something for him and in his kingdom, whatever it is, we ought to do it really, really well. But then you think about what Peter says in John 6, where he talks about the words of Jesus being the words that have to do with eternal life, right? And that's what we're doing in Bible class. We're we're sitting down with these kids and we're trying to lay up on their heart these words that pertain to eternal life. So if that's the thing that we're doing, we really need to work hard to do that really, really well. And so what I'd like to suggest is, I'm not sure excellence is always where we're at with our teen Bible classes. I don't mean to be too judgy about that, but when we've been using the same workbooks like for 3 decades, and we've never even paused and thought, well, what do our kids need at this age? And do these workbooks or topics or subjects we're discussing, do they cover those things that we need? And then you walk into the high school class and sometimes it kind of looks like a storage closet. The only visual aid is that yellowing set of maps on a tripod over in the corner with cobwebs growing up underneath it. Have y'all seen that, right? And the last teacher drafted is the one whose arms we got to twist to go and teach the teenagers. And so this guy reluctantly agrees to cover it. I'm just saying, if that's where we're at, I'm not sure we're getting to excellence with our most at-risk group. And so I'd like you to get a picture in your mind of these people we are trying to reach. This is the one thing we do, folks, when we come together that is uniquely for our young people. Think about that. And so for that reason, and because they are the most at-risk group among us, I think we need to do this really, really well. Well, if that's what we need to do, then let me just add, secondly, this thought. Maybe to help us get there, we need to think more about why we do that. So go back to that Bible class you're going to walk in on Sunday morning, except you're not just looking around this time. This time your job is to teach the teenage Bible class on Sunday. Let me ask you, why are you doing that? What is the purpose? What is the goal? What's the objective? And I guess there's an easy answer to that question. The impulse might be to say, well, my goal is to go in there and teach the truth. That's why I'm doing this, because I want to teach kids the truth. And there sure isn't anything more important than that. Can you just lay that down in the foundation? Let's underline it and highlight it and say, that is the critical thing. Folks, if we don't teach truth, we're doing more harm than good. Our goal is to help these young people become disciples of Jesus, to teach them his word, and then how to abide and continue in that word. Jesus said in John 8, verse 31, that is what discipleship is all about. So we want to be sure that we're teaching the truth. My question is that it? Is that the only objective we have, just to be able to say when we got done, everything I said was true? You know, Paul inspires me to think bigger than that. And so I'm headed over to Colossians. I hope you'll go there too. And think about what he says in Colossians 1. I just want to look at verses 9 and 10. Let's start at verse 9. Colossians 1 and verse 9. He says, for this reason also, since the day we've heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And let me just pause there, because when I teach a teen Bible class, I want to do that, don't you? I don't want to just get up and say the right things. What I'm hoping is that some of what I'm saying will stick, that it will take root in their hearts, and they'll meditate on this and think more about it, and it will increase their wisdom. They'll understand better who it is that God wants them to be. I don't want to just get up and say the right things. I want it to take hold, don't you? And I know that as the teacher, I'm not completely in control of that process. In fact, if I was going to be fair about this, I would have to acknowledge that really that taking hold part is a whole lot more about the heart of those young people than it is about my ability as a teacher. But to the degree I can help it take hold by making it plain and understandable and clear, I sure want to contribute to that process, right? So it's more than just saying the right things. And then you go down to verse 10, and he goes on to explain why he wants them to be filled with the knowledge of his will, because he says in verse 10, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, and strengthened with all power, and so on. He continues that thought. But there's the other thing. I don't want to just use Bible class to fill the mental filing cabinet. I'm hoping that the word that takes hold will then impact their life, and the kids are going to go away from their experiences with the word in these classes change and molded more in the image of Jesus. That's really the goal, to take what you learn and walk differently, right? And so I'd like to do that too. I'm not content just to say the right things or either with the kids getting the right things. I want them to be changed by the right things, to be different people as a consequence of this study. And again, I have to acknowledge that I'm not completely in control of that process, not even primarily. I mean, really, it's about the heart of the listener, whether or not they're going to choose to take the word of God and be changed by it. But as a teacher, to the degree that I can influence that by making my teaching relevant and applicable, to the degree that I can be inspirational and motivational, I want to be a positive part of that process, don't you? And so I guess my point about all of that is that when it comes to objectives, I think we need to think bigger than we do. It isn't just about getting up and saying the right things. It's more than that. It's implanting that on the heart. It's inspiring and motivating these kids to be changed and to be different. And so, if that's the goal, I'd like to say a couple of things to you in the time that I have left about how maybe we work toward achieving that goal. I think to some degree that's going to be influenced by what we teach. So could we go there next? When we go into that teen Bible class, what is it that we need to be teaching? And someone says, well, that's a pretty easy question because that means we need to teach the Bible. And that's right, that's the obvious answer. But let me give you another obvious observation about that. You're not going to be able to teach all of the Bible, right? I don't know how your classes are broken out. We have a high school class, which covers high school, 9th grade through 12th grade. I'm not the best at math, but I think that's 4 years, right? We are on a quarter system, which we have 4 quarters in a year. Let me really impress you with my math skills. That's 16 sessions, right? So the question then becomes, what do you teach in those 16 sessions? What material do we cover? And by the way, what will also have to be answered in the process, what are we not going to cover? What part of the Bible will not be taught from 9th to 12th grade? That's the reality that we're up against. I would suggest that we be very careful about sticking ourselves into some kind of an arbitrary system when making those kinds of choices. For example, someone says, well, this is pretty easy. You got 16 quarters, 8 Old Testament books, 8 New Testament books, done. Next agenda item. Well, no, because well, first, which 8 Old Testament books? And the Old Testament is bigger. Why are we dividing it in half? And why 8 and 8? What drove that choice? Some of us even want it easier than that. All we want is someone to publish a curriculum that goes from 9th to 12th grade so that all we have to do is get online and look at the next workbook in the series. It's real easy. Just order the next book and enough for everyone in class to have at least 2 because our kids lose at least 1 book during the quarter, right? So what I want to say to you is, don't get stuck in an arbitrary system like that. I think before we talk about ordering material and what workbooks to use, there's a more important question that needs to be asked. The question is, what do our kids need? What do we need to be talking to the kids about at this point? And listen, I think that we need to spend some time on that. That requires that we be real intentional, that we do a little digging. I think we need to be talking to some parents. I think that the people teaching the class need to weigh on this. Shepherds ought to be thinking about this kind of stuff since they're charged with keeping the sheep. And listen, I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to hear from the kids on this. I think we need to he Back in the summertime last year, we were talking to our church family about the need to build bridges to the lost, and I have a contingent of about 3 college students who came up to me afterwards and said, we need some help with this. We don't know how to talk to our friends. And when we do talk to them, it doesn't go very well. Could we have a class on evangelism? So you know what we did? We broke right into the middle of our curriculum and we added a class on evangelism. Now don't misunderstand, we don't give in to every little whim that our young people come up with. But listen, that wasn't a whim. That was a critical topic that young people need to be discussing today. If you don't think so, look at how they're behaving on Facebook when they disagree with each other. They really need some help with this. They need some guidance and direction. And so we took Gregory Kokel's book, Tactics, which was an excellent additional resource to plug into that class. And we've been working with them for the last 3 months on how to talk to their friends about the gospel. Listen, I just think that's a process that needs to be going on with this most at-risk group of people all the time. We've got to work this all the time because times change and kids change and needs change and resources and materials change. Right now, you may be working with a group in your high school class that didn't get a good foundation growing up, and they're just as weak as they can be, and you're having to go back and you're just having to relay those stones and strengthen that spiritual foundation. That may be where you are today, but remember that in 4 years, none of those kids will be in your class. And it's going to be a whole new group. And that group may have had great parents who built these great spiritual foundations. They don't need you to go back and work that stuff again. They need to build on that and add something to it. They need you to challenge us and take us into new territory. And so in that case, the curriculum would need to be adjusted for them. You see what I'm saying? Folks, we can't pick 16 topics or books or whatever and just replicate that over and over again endlessly. If we do that, we're not meeting the needs of our kids. And that ought to be driving what we're doing. I do want to add that I think it is awfully important not to overlook the need to address these fundamental pieces of their worldview. That's a little bit tough because kids who are church-going kids don't know why they need to talk about why they believe in God. Because they believe in God. And at 15, they don't think that's ever going to change. Because they're church kids growing up in that bubble, right? And they're living in a world where increasingly there are vicious assaults being made on the very basic things that disciples believe, like Jesus rose from the dead, like the miracles of Jesus. See, I can tie this into the topic for the week. Like the text of Scripture, like the existence of God. And so those are subjects that we need to come back and hit again and again and again. The problem is that what we're finding is that children, even as young as 5th and 6th grade, are already beginning to have doubts about their faith. We think they lose their faith in college. That's not how it works, folks. It's in college that we see that their faith was lost. The truth is they were gone a long time before that. And so we've got to go back and we've got to work on that. Got to work on that because I promise you, you don't have a little kid in your high school Bible class who's going to speak up at 14 and say, you know, I'm the one that doesn't believe in God and I need y'all to help me with that. He's not going to do that. That's why we have to go back and we have to work those spiritual basics with him. We try to do something that deals with worldview stuff at least once a year with our high school kids. So 25% of those 16 sessions are devoted to the basic pieces of their worldview. Here's what I'm trying to say. There ought to be a lot more that goes into deciding what to teach than just getting online and identifying the next workbook in the series. We need to really do some work with our young people figuring out what they need. And then, the last thing I want to talk to you about, and not last because I evenly divided my time between these 4 points, but last because I want to spend my most time here, I think we need to think about how we're going to go about teaching it. And candidly, my problem is that David's still sitting over there, which means I'm on the clock. because I'd like to just hang around all afternoon and talk about this. How much could we say about how to teach? I am worried that it hardly gets any attention at all typically in our preparation. I think someone assigns us a subject and we get handed a workbook and we prepare some kind of an outline. Maybe we don't even go that far. We just kind of go through the questions in the workbook and we don't ever really give a lot of thought to how I take this message that's been planned for me to share. How do I communicate this with this unique audience, this most at-risk audience, in a way that will stick and have impact and be life-changing for them? I don't know typically that we give a lot of thought to that at all. What methods, what resources, what tools are we going to use? What are our strategies for communicating the message? I think maybe to help us with this, we need to look more to Jesus. The more I've thought about Jesus as a teacher, the more I have come to be impressed with all of the different methods that the Lord used to communicate his message. Have you ever picked up on that? I mean, we find Jesus constantly with different groups in different settings, constantly shifting his approach. Have you noticed that? So you're in Matthew 13. What's he doing? Telling stories. Always thought it was funny that people criticize preachers for telling stories. It may be one of the most biblical forms of preaching, right? Jesus did it. And then he goes from telling stories in chapter 13, you get to Matthew 16, he's not telling stories anymore, he's asking questions now. Who do people say the Son of Man is? And who do you say that I am? And not just random questions, questions with a goal. He's taking them somewhere, right? And then I don't know what to do with Matthew 19. Matthew 19 looks like a debate to me. I don't think it's officially a declared debate, but there's clearly a proposition on the table, and there's all the back and forth of the debate with points being made and rebuttal being offered. It sort of looks like a debate there. And then you get to John 13, and he doesn't say anything, at least not his first. He takes these disciples who are battling over the issue of greatness, and he takes up the towel and the pan, and without saying a word, he washes their feet. Maybe the greatest demonstration ever. Scripture never records the disciples arguing about that again. I think when God washes your feet, it changes you. It changed them. And then you get to Matthew 22 and he used visual aids, not PowerPoint, but he did ask for a coin. He wanted them to look at whose inscription was on it. And then I turn over to Luke 9, and he's sending them out to teach. And I know that he's sending them out to teach, but it sure looks like there's more to that exercise than just going out to teach, that it's a learning exercise. There's some stuff that he wants them to take away from that. My point is this, that reaching our young people requires more than just getting a topic and making an outline to sit down and say something to them in class. I think is a completely separate step, additional step in that process. I need to be thinking about, okay, I know what the message is, but how do I communicate it? How do I do it in a way that will stick with them? I think we can't allow ourselves as teachers to become entrenched in one method that we've grown accustomed to and then just replicate that over and over again for the rest of our lives in every setting, no matter what. That is not how the Lord taught, brothers and sisters. And it's not how we should teach if we want to be effective. I think the opposite is true. Good teachers are always looking for a way to up their game. How can I do this better and be more effective in getting this message to stick? So, with the Lord as our example, what I'd like to do in the little bit of time I have left is to say a couple things to you about how to get the message to stick with this unique group that we're talking about today. So 3 final observations about teaching high school kids. Number 1, I think we need to begin with a crystal clear objective. If you're writing notes down, I'd like you to write that down. We need to begin with a crystal clear objective. It is impossible to hit a target when you don't know what the target is or where the target is, right? And so I think when we go in fact, you don't have to limit this to teenagers, it's really any teaching setting. When we go in to teach, we need to have absolutely a clear picture of what it is that I want these people to learn. 2 or at the most 3 things that when we're finished, I want those things to stick. And I think we need to ponder that question on 2 completely separate levels. The first level is this. You've been given the class for a whole quarter, right? So start there. What do I want them to learn this quarter? If I could illustrate that. A couple years back, I was asked to do an evidences class with our high school kids. And so as part of the prep for that class, my question was, all right, I get them for 3 months. What do I want them to know when we get done? And my first thought was, primarily, I want them to know that there are compelling reasons to believe what you believe. There's powerful evidence that confirms these basic pieces of our biblical worldview. And I want the kids to know when they go out of the class, I don't just believe this because of what mom and dad always said or what's always been taught. I believe it because there are good reasons to believe what I believe. I wanted them to get that. But I felt like that was only part of the story. I mean, the most important part of the story. But the fact is, they're going to go out into a world where there will be assaults made on those things they believe and on the evidence that I've been talking about. And so the second objective was we wanted them to know that there were answers for the arguments the critics made against their faith. In fact, we were realistic about this. We weren't even concerned with whether or not they would remember every answer. What we wanted them to know is that we talked about the kinds of things that unbelievers say about our faith, and we said something about it. So 2 years down the road, if they're off at school somewhere and something's challenging the integrity of the New Testament text, we wanted them to remember, I had a class about that. I think I have a notebook. I think there's something about that somewhere. Those were our objectives. So whatever class you're teaching, think about the whole quarter, this whole period I get with them. When we're done, what do I want them to know? The second level on which we need to ask that question is about every individual class, right? When I go in on Wednesday night, tonight, what do I want them to know when we get done? So one of the things we did with this evidences class is we thought about the argument atheists makes against the existence of God by pointing to the evil in the world. Y'all have heard that before, right? They argue that belief in God is incompatible with all the rotten things that are going on down here, evil and human suffering and all of that. It is the atheist's most compelling argument. Not because it is logically sound, it really isn't. But it tugs at our heartstrings. And so if you want to know something that's really undermining kids' faith, it's Sam Harris on the internet talking about how many thousands of babies will die in Africa today. Kids need an answer for that. Or at least they need to know that somewhere along the line, they heard an answer to that. And so Wednesday night, that was one of our agendas. We want to deal with this idea that suffering in the world is incompatible with belief in God. Just imagine that you're walking into your class on a Wednesday night. One of the elders is standing there on the door. He's smiling at you because he's not a big critical judgy elder. He just wants to help you. And he looks at you and he says, what do you want them to know tonight? If you can't immediately, without hesitation, give a clear answer to that question that doesn't require 92 sentences, you're not ready to teach a class. We can't hit a target unless we know where it is. Need to know what the goal is. We need to have learning objectives. Then, number 2, I want to reach teenagers today. We need to move away from the lecture model and do a better job engaging the kids. Now, folks, I understand. I preach for a living. That's my gig. There is a place for teaching where you have one set of ideas presented without any interruption. I'm good with that. Jesus taught that way. Isn't that the way the Sermon on the Mount was done? I don't get the idea the Sermon on the Mount was this big dialogue back and forth with the audience. I get the idea that Jesus delivered this lesson, right? In fact, there was even probably more to the lesson than what we have. And we have a place for that too. I mean, where I go to church, we have a whole hour that's devoted twice on Sunday. Yeah, we still do the Sunday night thing, where we have that kind of presentation. But there's also a place in teaching to have an idea put on the table and to have people interact about that idea. And so go back to Matthew 16. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Who do you say that I am? Jesus used that model too. And so I think that needs to be part of our approach to teaching as well, finding a place for that time to interact with our audience. In fact, I thought that's what we were supposed to do. I mean, we have Bible class, right? Then we have worship services where there's a sermon. What's the difference between the sermon and the Bible class? I've been thinking all these years that the Bible class is where you were supposed to kind of interact and everyone kind of gets to weigh in. But you know, sometimes even the teenage Bible classes look an awful lot like the sermon. 45-minute lecture, except in Bible class, we pause periodically and we'll ask, would anyone like to make a comment or ask a question, which is code language among us for don't speak now, right? I think that that kind of a model causes our young people to disengage pretty quickly. And they sort of drop out on the learning process. In fact, when I talk to kids about what makes them unhappy with their Bible class, that's the number one complaint. Teacher just lectures too much. And if not that, if they say things like, it's boring, I just don't get anything out of it, if you sort of dig down a little deeper, that's what you'll wind up hearing. Kids saying things like, well, the reason it's boring and I'm not getting anything out of it is the teacher just stands up there and does all the talking, and I just sit here and listen the whole time. Listen, let me go to the other side of this so I'm not misunderstood. I am not advocating for a free-for-all class. Have y'all seen these? A free-for-all class where some idea is thrown out on the table or some question is put out there, and then you have this shotgun fired. You go 1,000 different directions, all kinds of different points that are made, and when the end, you're not even sure what the class is about. I sat in a class like that recently. It wasn't a good class. I went away thinking, what was I supposed to have learned today? I finally titled the class, driving home with my wife, Stuff About Prayer, because that's kind of what it was. And so that's how sometimes Bible class turns out. We let everybody weigh in, and it goes all kind of different directions, and no points getting made. Listen, I don't advocate that either, because I don't think a lot of good learning is going on there. I'm just saying it's not one or the other. Lecture me to death, or open it up and we don't learn anything. Surely Jesus gave us the middle ground in Matthew chapter 16. Where we have this guided discussion. Listen, he's got a point he wants to make there, right? I'm the Son of God. And yet he's created this list of questions. You could plug in some statements there if you wanted to, that sort of guide the audience to the lesson you want them to learn. And yet along the way, they still get to participate. They get to be part of what we're doing, just in a way that is constructive and meaningful and takes us somewhere. I think that's what kids want. I don't think they're advocating for this kind of free-for-all where we just say whatever we want to in class. I just think they want to be engaged. I think they want to be included in the process. Now, I know when I say that there are probably some people sitting here thinking, I don't know what kind of weird church you go to in Texas, but I can promise you our kids do not want to talk where I go to church, right? I promise you that they do. They just need a little bit of help getting brought into the process. So a couple ideas about that. When I create my notes for my Bible class, the very first thing I write at the top of my page is warm up. I try to do something very early to get the kids engaged in the class. The longer you wait to do that, every minute that passes, you dig the hole deeper. It gets harder and harder and harder to get them back. So I would start very early. I like to just do some kind of list that I asked them to construct. We were doing a dating class one time, and I asked them to make this list. I said, is there a way you can know before you go out with someone that they would not be a good choice to date? Is there a way to know in advance? I think we called this worksheet, How to Spot a Loser at 100 Yards, okay? And so I asked the kids to make a list, everything they think of that would be a warning sign. And so they did. And then we went around the room and we created a big list on the board. but we were engaging them. You see that? Right at the beginning, they're getting involved in the process. I divide my class up into small groups. I actually use tables that'll sit about 4 kids, and I break my room up that way, so when they come in and sit down, they're automatically in some of a small group or a team. And I feed those teams questions as we go through our class together. I mentioned to you, we did this evangelism class where we spent some time in the book Tactics by Gregory Kokel. And one of the things that book spends a lot of time doing is talking about different situations you may find yourself in where you want to say something for the Lord and you just don't know what to do. So that was a lot of teamwork in our class. We would feed them a lot of assignments like, okay, you're in this situation. What are you going to say? How are you going to handle it? We let the teams talk about it a little bit, get that discussion going, and then they would share that feedback with the class. You see what we're doing? We're engaging them. We're letting them be part of the process. And then always lots of questions, folks. And that needs to be built into your preparation. Don't say, well, when I get here, I'll try to think of a question. Good luck with that. I've spent like 20 minutes crafting a question, and I get into class and I ask it, and I've said to the kids, wow, that was a horrible question. Let me see if I can fix it. Asking a question that requires more than a yes or no and that engages the kid, you gotta work at that. That's really hard. But it's worth the effort because ask the right question, and along the way, we're inviting these kids in to participate with us. I think it increases the learning. I think they do better in that setting. I think we need to get away from the lecture model. That says 1:38, but I did like start 3 minutes late, right? 2 minutes. Last thing I want to say to you is embrace technology. Yeah, I know, you can do a whole long speech about the evils of technology, and I've only got like 90 seconds left. There's a lot of good in technology. Can I illustrate that? There's a great video on YouTube of the famous atheist Richard Dawkins arguing in a debate with a Catholic priest how the beginning started. Any of y'all seen this? His argument is, from nothing came something, and that's his explanation for the beginning. And he goes over on again this debate, repeating that idea over and over again until finally the room erupts with laughter. And he looks at the audience and he says, why are y'all laughing? He really doesn't get it. Oh, but the kids do. I love being able to grab video clips like that and play them when we're talking about evidences. To get some of these guys like Frank Turek or William Lane Craig going toe-to-toe with the greatest atheistic minds and watching them eat these guys' lunch. Those little clips are great for our young people to see. You do realize that one of the factors undermining our kids' faith today is YouTube. They're getting online, they're looking at these videos. Sam Harris talking about how many thousands of babies will die in Africa today and asking, where is God? It's undermining their faith. I want them to know there's some other videos out there. Frankly, technology is so cheap today. How inexpensive to get a television, a device to stream to it. Let the kids see some of that. You're thinking, I have no idea how to do that. There's some 16-year-old kid in your class that does. Get him to help you, okay? Need to embrace technology. And as a part of that, will y'all help me out? Could we quit fussing about the phones? Someone asked me one time, what do you think about kids accessing the Bible on their phones? I kind of paused for a second and said, I'm not sure it matters what I think about it. Kids access the Bible on their phone. And when we say really, really silly things like, no, get out a real Bible, not that phone of yours, we sound like the guy that says, get rid of your book Bible and go find a scroll somewhere. We just sound dated, guys. It is how kids access the Bible today. I know there's some downside. There's some great advantages too, like multiple translations at 2 swipes, like the ability to take notes and have all that stuff with you. I fussed at a kid during Devo one time. He's over there typing away on his phone, texting someone while I'm teaching on something that he asked me to teach on. And 5 minutes into that, I had enough. I said, dude, I'm teaching over here, your subject. And he looked up and said, yes, and I'm taking notes. Don't you hate it when that happens? Because I want to go talk to a friend of mine about this at school. All right, let me wrap this up with this thought. Y'all know that being a disciple is a journey, right? We never get to the point where we've arrived and we don't have any room to grow and do better. We're growing our whole life. That's what I want to say to you about teaching. To be effective as a teacher, we don't develop our little way of doing it and then replicate that forever. If we want to be effective, it's about growing all the time, looking at new technologies and methods and tools to get better, and at the same time, looking back at the master and letting him guide us to be extraordinarily effective while we do this critical work. Thank you so much for coming today.